What's up? Hello, video talking about the end of the set, or the set's lifespan. I know we're not actually at the end of the set. The set ends in like March, like middle of March, I guess, once in set 7 comes out. And a lot of people are still playing for the Store Champs. I'll be at them this weekend as well. Probably running the same list, the Kiwi list, and just on the background as well, I got a video of my game at Continentals just to put something on the screen whilst I chat. So yeah, it's getting near to the end of the set, or what I think is near to the end of the set. I think we're at a point now where we haven't got any exciting new decks. There's no like bells and whistles coming out. I say that, and even the deck like this Sapphire Steel deck kind of came out of nowhere, and I've seen it everywhere. It's been awesome to see it like represented at places. But we're getting to the end of the set. People probably want to know what they need to play for to win their store champs and win their mats and stuff like that. And there's also a bigger event in Axion that is happening that I've just managed to get tickets for. We're going to be going there and playing, and it will be a set 6 event. So I just kind of wanted to do a video talking about what you should be playing and what to expect really. So right now, of course, you're nearing the end of the set. People have got the decks they wanted to play and they've learnt them as much as they can. They've probably stuck with them, which is a good idea. Um, Definitely, again, my rule above everything of what to play right now for set champs and any big events that you might have for set 6 coming near to the end of it where like the meta kind of figures itself out. But I'll get on to that point as well. The first thing to say is always play what you're comfortable with. That's why I've stuck with the Sapphire Steel aggro list. I've put the most time into it during this set. I've played it the most. I know the matchups the most. Even though people are sort of learning to counter it and play around it, it still felt like a decent pick into a lot of events. So I've stuck with it. But yeah, going into where we've got the high of the meta has figured itself out. Always saying play the deck that you think is the best. I'm just going to make sure I get that point clear because as I go into this a bit more in depth, it might kind of seem like I'm saying to play a specific deck when it really should just be play what you're comfortable with and how you know it to play. But right now, yeah, the meta sort of figures itself out. We've got some new decks that really have hit the scene that weren't really around in set 5. So of course the Diggy Dig Hole is a big one. Everyone sort of knows about that deck that's been performing well everywhere. At my store champs, it was littered everywhere, and when I check ink decks, I see it's pretty much the best performing list. Um, but that's sort of a new surprise list, and people are going to have to learn how to play against it. I have had to as well with this list, and even this list, I'm not trying to brag and say it's doing amazingly, but I've seen it in loads of different places, and that's been really awesome to see the deck represented and doing quite well. But yeah, you get all these fun lists, but what happens near the end of a set is everyone figures out how they need to win with their decks. Emerald Amethyst figured it out. Ruby Amethyst has figured it out. They figured out their game plan. And then on top of that, you'll have the control deck, which is Ruby Sapphire in Lorcana. For some reason, there is no other real control decks, or there's none that can really compete at Ruby Sapphire's level. And all Ruby Sapphire has to do, or the control deck, just in TCGs in general, is figure out how to beat the entire meta. And if it has the tools to do it, it can have a really good set. And we're at that point now where the expansion is going on so long. Ruby Sapphire has very much figured out how to beat the meta, and it's got loads of interesting cards. It knows the right ratios with its Maui Sharks, with Pirate's Life. It knows how much it has to invest in early game control. You know, cards like Queen of Hearts. Raya gets played a lot as well. How many Mauis it needs to run the 5-cost Maui. So they're at a point now where they've kind of learned how to do all of these different things, which is pretty good for them if you like Ruby Sapphire. I'm saying Ruby Sapphire right now is performing very, very well. When I checked the NA Continentals pods, I think 13 out of the 32 pods were won by Ruby Sapphire. So definitely that list is doing very well. And if you're going to your store champs, do pick it. I can't say it's a bad deck to pick. I don't like the deck at all. I was posting some memes about it today because I just generally don't like the deck. I don't dislike Hyper Control. I think it has a valid place in the meta, but when it really has nothing that beats it very efficiently, that kind of sucks. That usually in other TCGs you'll have like this cheat code deck, like some aggro decks that will just be able to beat it, and then they should be able to control everything else. But right now it's kind of not feeling like that at all. It's feeling very much like Ruby Sapphire just needs to know the right ratios and cards to play, and it can completely dominate the meta. But I just mentioned that point of 32 of them won in their NA Continentals pod, because when we go back to the EU Continentals, and that's why I picked this video as well, Emerald Amethyst was seeming like the dominant deck of the set. It was everywhere. It was the deck everyone was talking about with all new upgrades like Go-Go Tamagoa. all the new one drops it can use, the genie as well. It seemed like the deck to play, and it even did very well. It was played quite a lot. It got into the finals next to Ruby Amethyst. That's a deck that also doesn't die for some reason. So yeah, it, we kind of got around to Emerald Amethyst was really strong in the when the set was active during EU Continentals, and now we're at this point where I'd say Ruby Sapphire, because that was also in the finals of the NA Continentals, so we saw that it was doing very, very well there. So we kind of got this shift, and I think that's kind of happened because Emerald Amethyst is very good. It's very cool. It works really well. It does loads of fun things, and I'm pretty sure every Emerald Amethyst mainstay will tell you how good it is, and I would agree. But on top of that, you have it loses quite hard to steel decks. There's lots of steel decks around. Loads of people are playing steel. Um, but Emerald Amethyst was also a big killer of Ruby Sapphire, so it was able to beat Ruby Sapphire. And we've had this problem before, where we've had Hyper Aggro is a very good deck at beating Ruby Sapphire. This was, of course, before Maui Shark. But in between that, Amber Steel was getting played quite a lot, and that was doing quite an effective job. And that was a very strong killer of Hyper Aggro. So it was kind of this weird thing of Ruby Sapphire was dominating at the top. It was beating all of the Amber Steel and doing very, very well. But it was also Amber Steel was the one that was stopping the deck that can defeat Ruby Sapphire, which was Hyper Aggro at the time. And it's kind of felt a little bit similar in this scenario where Emerald Amethyst is the deck I think has the best chance at beating Ruby Sapphire, especially on the draw. I feel like even with my Hyper Aggro deck, I can win on the draw, on the play, sorry, versus Ruby Sapphire. But on the draw, it feels like maybe because they can spam the one drops out, they can play wide. They've got so much recursion, so much race. They also had very efficient game at beating Emerald Amethyst when they were on the draw as well. But of course they lose to all of the Steel Song, not all of it, and I think the matchup got shored up quite a bit, but it's still not amazing. So they are at a spot where Amber Steel and these controls, not just Amber Steel actually, I'm going to throw all of the Steel decks in there, are kind of keeping Emerald Amethyst from being played quite in large amounts because they know they'll just lose to that. And that's also the deck that could beat Ruby Sapphire, so it's kind of gatekeeping them from really being performing that well in the meta. And it's just this really interesting spot we've been at where Ruby Sapphire is also just going to be able to sit at the top and look back and go, right, so what are the decks I have to beat? What cards do I have to include? Do I need to include this? Do I need to include that? Um, and yeah, it's kind of where the meta has landed. Of course, as well, we are all thinking now, or how do we react to Ruby Sapphire now that they've figured out what we're doing? How do we beat it? And to be honest with you, you can't really. There isn't that many things you can do. Once they've figured out how to control a board, what characters have been played, what they aren't, you can try and throw some haymakers in there and some cards to catch them out. Especially in like the Sapphire Steel aggro list, I think putting Wendy Darling back in would be quite interesting because they are going up to like 3 counts of Sisu and they've got loads of ice blocks. But when you've got this free one that just is going to quest for 2 and they can't remove off the board unless they run something into it, I think that would be kind of cool. So you could get things like that. You can try and react, but overall, it feels like Ruby Sapphire is in a very strong position, and that's I don't know if it's worrying. As I say, I'm doing the Axion event, which I kind of want to perform quite well in. It is best of 3, so I think I'll still take my chances with my current deck that I've been playing this entire set. But yeah, it's just that really interesting point of Emerald Amethyst was very strong at the start of the set when everyone was trying to figure out how to win the game, how was the best decks to play. Everyone figured out what they want to do, especially as my lists haven't changed drastically or really anything at all in the last few weeks. Um, but then once everything's settled, once the meta is sort of settled, the hyper aggro list can come in and go, I'm going to control the entire event and control like everything that's going on. So that's kind of where we're at. Of course, locally, if you were to bring a Ruby Sapphire, and I think this is why Ruby Sapphire has been performing well, but not amazingly at Store Champs. So, sorry, I've just talked about Axion, so I'm going to talk about Store Champs a bit more and what I think you should bring if you want to try and win. So Ruby Sapphire can perform very, very well. If you're a very good Ruby Sapphire player, like that is your deck you play, please do play it. But I think the way these control decks have to work these days is they do have to very much tailor themselves to their events. And say if you know you're going to your locals and you know what everyone plays, you know what the decks people enjoy are, you can easily just go, okay, I know how to build this. I can build it so I can beat the Amber Steel matchup and the Emerald Amethyst matchup, and I can build it so it beats these decks, and then pray for my pairings. I hope I get good pairings. Um, But if you're going to like say a store you don't very go to very often, because of course you go to more than one, I've been doing one like every weekend, you might bring a list and go like, wow, this is very much tailored to beat Ruby Amethyst, and I'm surprised there's no Ruby Amethyst players in this room. You can still walk away with the win somehow if you're a very good Ruby Sapphire player, of course. But I feel like the deck really needs to be tailored, and at these bigger events, they know what the majority meta is in the room. They can make very good meta calls, so they can figure out how they need to build the list to win the event. But at a store champs, that's not really something you can do if you've never been to the store before, and it's such a small local meta where you might be playing with like 20 to 30 people, and like a couple losses or one loss might be the reason why you didn't make cut. Especially some of them only going to top four. It's a really small room. Um, so I think locally, I found the Diggy Diggy Hole Steel Song thing is probably the best pick for a store champs right now. I think it's just really aggro. I don't think it catches anyone off guard. I think what it just does is very efficiently. I've even seen it beat Ruby Sapphire, and as I mentioned, Ruby Sapphire lists that aren't very much tailored to win that matchup, so they are falling behind and losing it. Um, and then on top of that, I think Ruby Amethyst as well. I think a stock Ruby Amethyst build, if you were to not get hit by so many Lilos and Doc builds, I think you could end up winning that matchup as well. I think you can end up performing quite well with Ruby Amethyst in those events. But I think overall, the Diggy Diggy Hole Steel Song list has just been really outperforming at the store champs in these local level plays. Not everyone at their store champs might have the most efficient and like best players as well. And when you're just getting pushed for lore constantly, and that's also what the holes build does. The Diggy Diggy Hole is it constantly makes your opponent have to respond and have the answers rather than um, you having to answer everything on their board. Which I can say if Ruby Sapphire, like I mentioned, if you build it and it doesn't have the answers in it because you didn't know what you were going to see at this event, you can lose and just have a really bad run. And I've seen, especially I played one last weekend where there was two Ruby Sapphires and one of them had it built very much for the room. They did very well. They won. They played a mirror to start it off with, and won it. And then the other one just didn't really have the options for that room. And like I say, you get some very unique decks as well when you play at Store Champs. So yeah, I think that can go either way. Whereas if you've got a deck that's very proactive, I'm going to keep saying DD Hole, but I'm also going to mention again as well the Sapphire Steel deck that I've built because it's just going to plug it. You're constantly making your opponent answer, and if they just don't have the answers, they lose. Of course, if you had like an exerted Alice and they have a Fox, they can take that trade and probably win the game. But you're constantly making them say, do they have these cards? Do they have it? Have you inked it? Have you played this right? Do you know this matchup? Do you know how to win it? So the proactive decks I think are really strong right now for the store champs. I think they're going to win it. I think if you were to do the big events like at Axion, you could make a really good meta call on the day and build the Ruby Sapphire list to perfectly win that room. You could be like, I don't expect to see any Ruby Amethyst, but I do expect to see a lot of Steel Song, so I'm going to build it very heavily to deal with these Steel Song decks. And I think that's kind of how the set is at this point. It's very fine tuned. I think the changes people make to their lists are very minor. I'd be really excited to see if anyone picks anything that's like meta viable and big. As I've seen, like some people like Sapphire still play around with King Candy, which has always been a fun card, but I've never seen it like insanely meta viable. And I'm sure there's going to be loads of like themed decks and like broom decks that will come out and 99 puppies and stuff. But I'm talking about very high like meta defendant decks, and I don't think we're seeing any now just because both Continentals are done. The only chance we'd have to see anymore is at the DLC in Melbourne. But besides that, I think everyone sort of made it, and even the list that we're going, oh, that's caught me off guard, like say Ed's list, it's still Ruby Amethyst. It's just the changes around was it to tech it very heavily for Ruby Sapphire meta, which is really cool because you can go Ruby Sapphire is doing very well. Well, I build a list that I think does really good into Ruby Sapphire and take my chances there and prey on the pairings. But that's sort of bigger event and bigger talk. But yeah, definitely I think if you're doing store champs, these quick proactive decks like holes and I think I prefer the steel ones. I prefer having John Silver and Pete, so I'm going to say that and the Sapphire Steel deck that I've got are going to perform very well and very much win store champs. Whereas at these bigger events where people have done good meta calls and knowing what everyone's playing, I think for sure Ruby Sapphire will come out on top. I'm expecting to see at Axion a Ruby Sapphire winner, even though I'm playing there and not bringing Ruby Sapphire. So yeah, I just kind of want to talk where the meta is and sort of wish everyone good luck at the next weekend of store champs. I'll do a tweet and get people to post anyone's lists who win using my build because, like I say, we're at the end of the set. I don't think anything big's going to happen deck wise, but it'd be really cool to see if anyone's got any tech choices or they say, oh, I included this card and it worked out really well. So yeah, just excited for that and good luck.